Welcome to the Secret Agenda channel. Ukraine's war of independence against Russian aggression for 9 months has changed many things, especially in both countries and in many countries of the world. The humanitarian values that Ukrainians uphold and their fight for democracy, freedom, and independence deeply affected many ethnic groups. Thanks to this struggle of Ukraine, a new trend was formed and many fighters started to fight voluntarily in the ranks of Ukraine against the aggressor, Russia. More than 50,000 volunteer fighters from Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Middle East are fighting in the ranks of Ukraine, regardless of religion, language, or race. In particular, Chechens see past their conflicts with Russia as similar to what Ukrainians have experienced, and they join the ranks of Ukraine to fight against Russia. Thousands of Chechens have joined and continue to join the Ukrainian Army from the very beginning of the war, and are fighting against the Russians in the Ukrainian Army. Chechens are a born warrior nation that made the Russian army experience hell during the time of the Chechens. The most special 2nd Battalion of Chechens joined the Ukrainian army in the first days of the war, and provided very critical intelligence about the Russian army to the Ukrainian army. Vital information such as the strategies of the Russian army, the ammunition depots, and the location of their headquarters were provided to the Ukrainian army by these heroic Chechen battalions. Let us examine in all details the striking struggle of thousands of Chechen fighters in the Ukrainian army against the Russians. This war, which pushed Russia into the darkest periods of its history, threw Ukraine into a unique struggle for independence. As the days passed, Russia began to find it difficult to adapt to harsh conditions of this war. On Ukrainian soil, the Russians, trying to realize their plans, were faced with the surprising strength of the resistance of the Ukrainian army. After this process, the Russian administration, led by Vladimir Putin, turned to deported resources to strengthen its army. Chief among these sources was Russia's #1 ally, Chechnya. The leader of Chechnya was Ramzan Kadyrov, who is quite close to Putin and even referred to as the adopted son of the Russian leader. Kadyrov sent thousands of his soldiers to the Russian army in the Ukrainian war. Of course, this step of Kadyrov was not to protect the interests of Russia. It was Putin who brought Ramzan to power. To many, Kadyrov is seen as a puppet leader who only cares about his own interests. In addition to the Kadyrovite soldiers under the control of Kadyrov, the real Chechen fighters are fighting on the side of the Ukrainian army, both against the puppet government of Chechnya and against the Russians in Ukraine. Kadyrov was persuading the Muslim Chechens to fight for the Russian army with a lot of propaganda and religious manipulation or force. Recently, Kadyrov has been trying to argue that fighting for the Russians is jihad and luring Chechens to fight for the Russian army. However, jihad is only a call and a method of defense against attacks on a country's territory, freedom, religion, and beliefs. Many Chechens who have lived and seen the war with Russia continue their hatred and struggle against Kadyrov and Putin. Thousands of Chechens who know that freedom and real jihad is to fight for the freedom of Ukraine are fighting shoulder to shoulder with Ukrainian soldiers. These Chechens, who have been tortured by the Russians throughout their history, supported the heroic Ukrainian army in the freedom struggle. Volunteer Sheikh Mansour Battalion and Zokhar Dadayev Battalion are two legendary Chechen groups fighting on the side of the Ukrainian army against the Russians. After joining the Ukrainian armed forces by fighting in the battalion of hundreds of Chechens, Sheikh Mansour and Zokhar Dadayev across Europe, the Ukrainian army has become much more resistant to the Russians. While the Chechen soldiers fighting in the Russian army complain about not getting a salary or the conditions of the war, the fighters of these two Chechen battalions are willing to die for the Ukrainians in the war. It is known that these two battalions included many non-Chechen Muslim fighters. The basic motto of these two Chechen battalions is known as, "We must get 10 Russian ears for every Chechen ear." Kadyrov had declared these dissident Chechens as traitors. Both Putin and Kadyrov were very worried about this situation, as these fighters, which pose a very dangerous element for Russia and Kadyrov, are part of the Ukrainian army. Kadyrov's concern is fear that his own soldiers could not be so brave and loyal. Putin's concern is that there is another threat to the Russian army, which is currently in a very difficult situation on Ukrainian soil. Now let's get to know this legendary Sheikh Mansour Battalion closely. This group got its name from a Chechen military commander against Russian expansion in the Caucasus in the 18th century. Mansour, the current deputy commander of the Sheikh Mansour Battalion, was only 13 years old when Russian soldiers destroyed the village of Samashki during Chechnya's first war of independence against Russia in the 90s. By the way, it's purely coincidental that the names of Commander Mansour and the battalion are the same. Armed with flamethrowers, the Russians burned Mansour's neighbors alive in their homes, threw grenades in basements, and executed people. 4 years later, the truce was broken and Mansour returned to the war. Returning to the war, Mansour stated that after that, nothing was ever the same. Mansour said that Russia has destroyed everything I have. I grew up with war and war shaped me in every way. Mansour was one of more than 200,000 Chechens who fled to Turkey and Europe during the Second War between Russian Federal Forces and fighters in Chechnya, a republic in southern Russia. Leaving his home did not mean giving up his fight against Russia for Mansour. Mansour said, "If I had been born in America or Canada, I would not have come here to Ukraine. But since Russia took everything from me, I have to resist. Nothing else matters." Today, Mansour is deputy commander of the Sheikh Mansour Battalion, one of at least 2 Chechen battalions fighting against Russia in Ukraine. These Chechens are among the 20,000 foreign fighters in the Ukrainian government, estimated to have joined forces in early March, near the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Chechens say they are ready to fight against Russian forces and other ethnic Chechen soldiers sent to fight on behalf of Russia. Pro-Kiev Chechen fighters refused to disclose their numbers in Ukraine, citing security concerns, particularly from Kremlin-backed Chechens. That's why they gave only their first names or no names at all. However, they stated that the Chechen battalions numbered at least in the thousands. In Ukraine, Russian soldiers shot civilians, indiscriminately bombed schools and apartments, and terrorized the towns and villages they occupied. However, Chechen soldiers say they are not affected by this horror. They believe they've already gone through much worse. A soldier in Mansour's battalion said, "Ukraine's tragedies in Bucha and Mariupol are nothing compared to what we went through growing up. The Russians have razed our cities and villages." This is the real Chechens, fighting on the side of Ukraine against the Russians, not recognizing Putin's pawn Kadyrov as their leader. Chechens say they are willing to pass their knowledge of this experience of fighting Russia for the past 20 years to the Ukrainian military. Contrary to the USA, these Chechens who state that they do not have howitzers or heavy weapons to give to Ukraine, say that their individual lives are not so important. For this reason, they are even willing to die in the war against the Russians. Another soldier in Mansour's battalion said, "We lost our homeland. What more can a person lose? We lost our home and the whole world was quiet. Only our family or our children were with us." Members of the Sheikh Mansour Battalion emphasized that it's important to resolve a 400-year-old feud that began in the 1700s, when the Russian Tsars pushed into the North Caucasus, where Chechens lived. Finally, on this subject, Mansour said, "Whatever happens, they are playing a long game here. In Tsarist Russia, General Yermolov stole everything from us, but we got rid of it. Stalin is dead. Putin will die. We will keep these people alive." Mansour underlined that his Chechen group will always fight against the Russians wherever Russia is in the world. Overall, Chechens are divided on whether to fight for Russia or against Russia. In 2006, when Moscow appointed pro-Russian leader Ramzan Kadyrov to govern Chechnya, Kadyrov pledged support and loyalty to Putin for his invasion of Ukraine. Kadyrov claimed that Chechen fighters loyal to Russia were sent to Ukraine to fight for Putin, so it's entirely possible that Kadyrov's Chechen soldiers are currently fighting real Chechens. Kadyrov, on the other hand, did his best to obey Putin's orders at the beginning of the war. But the current situation is seen as the Wagner leader Prigozhin and Kadyrov opposing Putin, leading to a change in Russian power. This alliance is life-threatening for the Kremlin. We will see the results of this situation together in the coming days. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications in order to be informed about new videos. Thank you for watching us.